since I left the IPS to do an MBA and join consulting, it's very hard for me to make the case that you should join IPS and stick around.
But okay, let's still go with the IIT degree.
Okay, take all of that out, what I would do.
If I were to ask you 3 improbable facts about you, what could those 3 improbable facts will be? Have you ever wondered what are Rajan Singh's views on IPS versus consulting, or what he would have done had he not been an IPS officer or had he not cracked MBA from Wharton? Then hi, welcome to my channel. I'm starting a new series called the Shatakshi Show, where I'm inviting leading entrepreneurs and professionals to talk about all things MBA, all things consulting, and all things career advancement, especially in your early years. So feel free to hit on the subscribe and the notification button so that you are notified whenever I'm bringing out new content, from either inviting other people or my own personal videos, so that you get to learn whenever we are sharing out content.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Very excited, Rajan. Frankly, I've been looking forward to this chat. And if I were to take this honor of formally introducing you on my YouTube channel, you are the co-founder of Habit Strong. You have many more laurels that we can talk about. You've been a McKinsey consultant, you've worked in private equity, and of course, you have been an IPS officer as well. So very excited to have you on my channel, and thank you so much for taking out time. Over to you if you have any initial comments to start with.
Thank you, Shatakshi. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the very kind introduction. So glad to be here. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. So Rajan, whatever questions that I could think of, they largely come from the point of view of someone who is in his or her 20s and is going through certain conundrums in his or her life. So I get this question very often, which I don't think I am in a capacity to answer. So largely, people have this conundrum when they are in their early 20s or mid 20s, that should we take the route of management consulting or should we take the route of IAS and IPS officer? You are one of the very few people in this country who have been in both the positions. If you were to pick one at an age of 25, which one would you pick and why?
Shatakshi, thanks for the question. Very interesting. Since I left the IPS to do an MBA and join consulting, it's very hard for me to make the case that you should join IPS and stick around. But let me, I think the honest answer would be, it obviously is a subjective choice. So there is no objectively superior option. There are some people for whom being in the IPS or IAS or foreign service might be a better answer, and for obviously many others, being with McKinsey, BCG, or firms like that might be a better answer. Now, let me just sort of weigh the pros and cons, so I think people can take a more informed and more customized decision. The thing about the civil services, which I thought stands out, is that you get very substantive responsibilities early on in your career. That, I think, is like the big headline. So you would be in the IPS, as an example. In my case, I was in my 20s, I was running the city police van, or IAS, you might be the collector of a district. So you get to run a very large establishment with very complex set of issues, solve very challenging problems, handle people, including very difficult people, work with all kinds of people. So you have to work with politicians and governors and the common man. So essentially, across the social spectrum, across the political spectrum, the economic spectrum, one thing which I found very unique about this job is there are many good jobs where, let's say, in one case you interact only with fund managers, other case you interact only with, let's say, entrepreneurs, or you interact only with workers, or here it's not the case. You actually go across the whole spectrum. That, I think, is interesting. The challenges are pretty significant. So if you're looking for a difficult job, I think this is right there. I'll tell you where, despite all this, why I left it and where it might, where the cons come in. So couple of limitations, I would say, One is that in government, you are part of, you have a huge establishment, you're running, you have a big responsibility. But in terms of what you can do with that, the canvas is large, but what you can do that in that canvas is sort of limited. It may not feel like it from outside, but it actually is. So just as a simple example, you run a startup, and if you wanted to hire number two to you can do that. But in government, that's not the case. You don't get to choose your team. So the hiring process, there'll be a public service commission or there's some other. So for everything, there is a mechanism, and it's normally a very bureaucratic, slow moving mechanism. So essentially, you can't hire people, you can't fire people, you can't incentivize them, you can't promote them, you can't, if somebody's really good, you can't give them something which others won't get. So everything is very time bound, which has got both its advantages, smaller number, and disadvantages, pretty larger number. So essentially, you saying that your hands are tied is not a good way, but that could be sort of one way to think about it, that you are not that your hands are tied, but the degrees of freedom you have are pretty limited. In private sector, on the one hand, yes, your canvas is smaller. So as an example, like my wife is in the IAS, and she right now heads the health department in Kerala. So if you look at the scope of her work, it's mind boggling. Like there'll be thousands of doctors, hundreds of hospitals and healthcare centers, probably more than hundreds, which all fall under her domain. So she's responsible for, in some sense, her organization is responsible for healthcare of 3 crore people, which I think is the equivalent in private sector would be like massive, bigger than running in Apollo hospitals. But at the same time, in an Apollo, or if you're running a hospital or a primary care or any kind of healthcare chain, you can do a lot more. You can do anything. You can change the from set of people to how they're incentivized to what kind of culture you create. So you get to play with a lot more variables. Second thing is, government is by definition a monopoly. In a monopoly, what happens is, well, the customers will come to you, because what choice do they have? They're not really customers. They are like, sort of, you might even think that you are a benign emperor doing favors to them, which is not the way to think, but a lot of people might think like that. So private sector, because it is competitive, it has it has greater degrees of freedom, and your survival is not guaranteed. Like you run a startup, you need to make sure it does well. You can't just say, okay, I'll show up at work. Whereas in government, like your job is going to be around. You can be assured what will happen in the next 30 years. You will show up and there'll be work for you to do. In private sector, there's no guarantee. So I would say, if you're looking for lifelong learning, if you're looking for more degrees of freedom, looking for a challenge where you figure things out, you make stuff happen, even if it's at a smaller scale. From that point of view, private sector, especially if you work in firms like McKinsey, or even I would say not just consulting firms, even if you are working in interesting roles in other private sector companies, be it startups, be it larger companies, you will be pushed to learn and do a lot more. So here, in some sense, you peak early, and then it plateaus out in terms of learning. Whereas in private sector, you peak late, but there is no plateauing, or at least if you are the kind who wants to learn, you will keep getting better, or you will keep learning new things, and the graph can keep going up. So that is the choice that people have to make.
Got it. Very well articulated, Rajan. And I really like the component of freedom also associated with the role. And I'm kind of imagining the future of work. And I think after the pandemic, a lot more people are now focusing upon the freedom aspect on the future of work equation, which brings me towards another interesting hypothetical question. Rajan, you have worked in IPS and you have studied your MBA from Wharton. Both of them are actually positions for the top 1% of the people, which by its nature means that 99% of the people don't have that, right? If you were to go back in past and you think that you don't get either of them, I'm sure if you were to reattempt, you would still get them. What kind of life could you imagine for yourself professionally, if not an MBA at Wharton and if not IPS either?
Yeah, I guess in my specific case, if that's a question, I would still have an IIT degree, so I would probably take up a technical job or?
I forgot that, but okay, let's still go with the IIT degree.
Okay, take all of that out, what I would do. Very interesting question. Let me put it this way. If I were born a little bit before I was born, so I went to college in 1991. Let's say if I had gone to college in 70s or 80s, I would have said tough luck, because the opportunities were so minimal. And if you did not have these advantages, it was very, in fact, I'll give you one very interesting data point. When I joined IIT in 1991, if you look at you won't find those placement statistics, but I had gone to the placement office and checked it out, just out of curiosity. TCS had made only 6 offers in 1991. Right? So it was like a super exclusive job, very small number, like the top performers, not branch toppers necessarily, but really guys who were the cream in the department, they would, in computer science or electrical, they would get the job. When I graduated that year, Infosys made, I think, more than 150 offers, maybe like nearly 200. So half the batch got placed in Infosys. TCS might have made a competing or similarly large offer. But the point is that by the time I graduated, and of course, years after that, the opportunities opened up massively. So today I would say, in fact, it's a fantastic question. If I did not have any degree, if I had no pedigree, if I had nothing else, I still have Coursera. I still have opportunities where I can learn at low cost. And this is not theory. This is not like a nice answer, but hard to do. No, it's actually, it's very feasible. In fact, there are a lot of people, for privacy reasons, I won't take the name, but I spoke to a guy today, just today afternoon, and he is doing machine learning for a very good company in Europe. And he told me, like, he just learned it on his own. So today I would say we have run out of excuses. And even if you don't have the degree today, IIT Madras is offering an online degree. So there is a lot that we can do today. So I'm hoping that I would be sensible and smart enough to take advantage of these learning opportunities and create some niche for myself. That's what I hope I would do.
Sure. It's a beautiful answer because you combine the macroeconomics to the upskilling trends that are taking place. Because if I'm not wrong, in the 1990s, there was an IT boom revolution taking place. And then the journey has just been upwards in terms of the opportunities in the market. And very interestingly, I also came across a youngster who got a job in Morgan Stanley, and he actually learned the entire financial modeling, the crux of it on Coursera. So I'm completely with you that if you know what kind of skills you want and if you have the motivation, there is no one stopping you. Which makes me switch levers, Rajan, a little bit and talk about policies in this country. If I'm not wrong, I read a post of yours on LinkedIn, which was about how the 99.5 or 99% of the people are actually eliminated during the UPSC examination process. The process is basically made through certain stages that it actually increases the barrier of entry, and it increases the time for preparation. Once again, I have never prepared for this exam. You would know this more than me. But if I were to ask you, what are certain low-hanging fruits? If we were to have a discussion with UPSC, and if we were to advise them, these are the 3 things that we can change in the process, what will be your 2 cents? And I'm asking that from a position that I actually work with DIPT as a lateral advisor, and we still have certain connections and friends working there. So if you were to influence that policy, what are certain ideas that come on the top of your mind?
It is easier to be critical and say what doesn't work. It's very hard to say, like, try this alternative. So I'm also in that bucket. I know what doesn't work.
Sure.
It's a little more challenging to suggest
Sure.
what would be an alternative that is workable. But let's at least start with what doesn't work. I would say the challenge with civil services, the basic premise is that you get very smart people who are exceptionally talented, well-educated, etc., and give them early leadership as opposed to the other. So there are 2 models. One model is like make the entry very hard and very, very selective. And when these guys come in, or these folks come in, give them everything, like take the whole responsibility. Versus the other is, okay, everybody starts at the bottom and then you work your way up and very small number get there. Both models have their pros and cons. You could decide which one you want to go for. I would say this current model, it may appear elitist, which it is in some sense, but what it also does is, in a country where our rule of law is sort of very weak, political interference can often wreak havoc with any kind of system. Getting some people through an objective system and giving them the leadership, I think there are some merits to it. There are huge demerits as well. Right? So it's unclear to me like what the alternative is, because if it is all through selection, which naturally has many merits, it can be hugely influenced by just choices made by the political establishment, and there would be certain amount of danger. So this Sardar Patel called this iron frame. I don't think it's an iron frame, but it's some kind of frame. So what could one possibly change? One thing which the government has already done is they are taking some people on lateral basis from private sector. I think it's a good move. Again, one could obviously find pros and cons, but overall, I think done within, if it is done properly, done with the right intentions, to a limited degree, it's a good measure. The pros and cons I can lay out before you. The pros are like you can get access to, let's say, as an example, somebody who has worked at McKinsey or in Tata's or wherever, where they have had very good experience. Now that person's lifelong learning cannot be accessed through the civil services, but that person would be probably happy to come for 4 years and do some work and go. So that is something that you can do. But the risk there is, and which always will come with the risk, is I can then get people who are not committed to the right thing. So if I have a certain political preference, I can just get people who will just align with my political preference. So there are those kind of risks. Now, specifically the exam, I would say the thing I don't like about the exam, I'll be honest with you, is it tests for things which really do not have that much relevance for what you do. So I have written exam on physics, on mathematics, on geography, like all kinds of stuff. And it's very random because you have like 40 subjects. Let me give you one example, which might be a surprise to many people. If I'm taking maths as my subject and you are taking political sciences as an example, how would you do an apples to apples? Because maths is objective. If you give me like 20 maths problems, especially at the level at which civil services is, I will get all 20 of them right. And I'm pretty sure, like, I don't know, when I wrote the exam, I had maths and physics. I'm 99% certain I did not make any mistake. In which case I should get 100 out of 100, in which case I should be the topper, but I'm not the topper, obviously. So what do? So you do something. Nobody knows what it is, right? There is something happens there where you scale up, scale down. It's very arbitrary. It's necessary. I'm not saying it's not required, but it's very arbitrary. So there are all those kind of problems. I think the one, or like I said, pointing fingers and saying what the problem is easier, finding a solution is much harder. I would say a couple of things. First of all, people today I see trying for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. I do not think it's a great idea. It may be, if I'm an applicant, obviously it's not pleasant to me if somebody says, okay, only 2 attempts, but I think the attempts should be limited, age should be limited, so that people don't make the mistake of writing the exam. See, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how long you write. Statistically, only whatever 1% or less than 1% people are going to make it. At least top services, less than 1%. So which means by design, 99% people, 99 plus percentage people are going to fail, and we make them struggle till the age of like 28, 30, 35. It's not a great idea. So one thing which can be done straight away is like, you get 1 shot at it or 2 shots at it. That's it. Good luck, bad luck, whatever, like, get done, move on. Like in life, there's so much. So that could be one thing. Like I said, it won't be a popular move, but it will actually, it's like a medicine, bitter medicine, which will help the patient, but they won't want. So that is one change you could make. Second is, you want to test me on maths and physics and somebody else on Sanskrit, that's perfectly fine. But then do you have a mechanism to compare? I don't know. So can you have like a common thing, like everybody's tested on the same thing, so that way you don't do this whole subjective thing? I think that would make it more this thing. Third is the process. It's like quite long. It takes 1 year to just go through 1 attempt. And so you have 3 exams. If there was a way to like compress it and make it like shorter, I think that would be good. Finally, if I can give a message to people, if anybody is like watching or listening to this thing, there is a lot more to life than the civil services. Honestly, if you really love those positions, if you love that kind of responsibility, go for it. But Otherwise, there is so much out there, and I have been on both sides, so I can say with certainty there's a lot out there. So unless you are very passionate about those things, about uh, public sector, working for the government, if that's power, reputation, prestige, and all that, I think they play a much bigger role in our minds than actually it does. At the end of the day, you're going to look for job satisfaction, and what you do 9 to 5 or 9 to 7, whatever, that has to be satisfying. And I think there are a lot more opportunities. I wish 1/10 of people wrote the exam, or 100, because this current statistics doesn't make sense, and people spending years and years, that doesn't make sense. So cut down, make all those changes. I think you will improve it to some extent. But look, if you are trying to, if the positions are only 200, and if people who are desirous are like 2 lakhs, you're going to have some crazy race, because at the end of the day, you need to have some mechanism. Whatever you choose is going to get crazy. This is also crazy. So even though it's not great, you could try these changes. But yeah, I don't have a beautiful solution like try this alternative package.
It all makes sense, Rajan. And I can think of 2 more points if I were to add to this. If
Sure.
I'm not wrong, our Honorable Prime Minister actually tweeted on the day of civil services results this year or last year that those who couldn't make it, it is time to move on. There are plenty more opportunities. If our Prime Minister, which is the highest political seat in this country, is saying things like that, it means that, and people like you who have been in that journey, I also want to re-emphasize on this point, which kind of connects me to the second point. I think this is kind of sunk cost fallacy, because I have put in 4 years, let me put 1 more year and then I will crack it.
I hope you liked this video and got a chance to learn about all things MBA, all things consulting, and all things skill. And I've always maintained, if you need more help to get into management consulting, product management, and public policy, feel free to check out my education venture, globalgovernance-initiative.org. With that, if you like this video, feel free to click on the like button and share it with your friends so that they get to know about all the interesting content that I'm bringing out through the Shatakshi Show for all of you. Ciao, ciao.